Imagine standing in the labyrinthine, stone-paved streets of the Subura, the most densely populated and dangerous district of ancient Rome. The year is 110 D, at the zenith of the empire's terrifying power. It is high noon, and the Mediterranean sun beats down mercilessly, baking the dust and refuse of the city into a pungent, choking haze. The air is thick, almost solid, with a cacophony of sounds, the clatter of wooden cartwheels on basalt, the shouting of merchants hawking fish and garum, the crying of children, and the distant, rhythmic marching of the urban cohorts. Amidst this chaotic symphony of daily life, a woman moves with a frantic, desperate energy that sets her apart from the casual strollers and busy laborers. She keeps her head down, pulling the rough wool of her palla tight around her face, trying to shrink into the shadows of the towering, rickety tenement buildings that block out the sky. Her heart hammers against her ribs like a trapped bird, a rhythm of pure, unadulterated terror. She is running. She is running not from a crime she committed against the gods, nor from a theft of gold or jewels, but from a crime defined by the cold, iron laws of men she has stolen herself. She is a fugitiva, an escaped slave, and in the eyes of Rome, she is not a person seeking freedom. She is a walking act of rebellion, a piece of property that has dared to grow legs and assert a will of its own. For this woman, every glance from a stranger is a potential death sentence. Every patrol of the vigiles, the city watch with their torches and cudgels, is a terrifying threat that could end her life as she knows it. She knows the stakes better than anyone. If she is caught, there will be no trial, no defense attorney pleading her case, no appeal to mercy or human rights. The Roman legal system views her not as a human being with a soul, hopes, and dreams, but as res, a thing, an object, a tool that has malfunctioned. And the punishment for this malfunction is designed not just to correct her behavior, but to obliterate her identity, to scour her humanity from the face of the earth. The empire that built the Colosseum and the aqueducts, that gave the world the foundations of modern law and philosophy, also perfected the machinery of human degradation to an industrial art form. Today, we are going to descend into the darkest corners of Roman history, peeling back the marble facade to reveal the blood-soaked foundations beneath. We are going to examine the specific, calculated cruelties inflicted on women who dared to dream of freedom in a world that demanded their total submission. This is not a story of gladiatorial glory or imperial conquest. There are no heroes here, only victims and executioners. This is the story of the branding iron, the collar, and the cage. It is a story preserved in the cold text of legal codes and the grim discoveries of archaeology. We will look at how the Roman state used the female body as a canvas for its authority, marking it, breaking it, and erasing it to ensure that the institution of slavery remained unshaken. This is the brutal reality of what happened when a woman tried to run. To understand the punishment, one must first understand the nature of the crime in the Roman mind. Escape, or becoming a fugitivus, was considered a disease of the slave, a moral failing that threatened the stability of the entire household, and, by extension, the state itself. For a woman, The decision to run was often born of desperation far deeper than the desire for abstract liberty. Roman law gave masters, or domini, absolute power over the bodies of their slaves, a power known as dominium. This included the right to sexual access without consent. For many enslaved women, the household was not a home. It was a site of constant, legalized violation. They were not merely servants, they were concubines, objects of lust, and victims of whim. Others fled to protect their children, who could be sold away at a moment's whim to pay a debt or buy a new luxury, severing the maternal bond with a single transaction. The motivation was primal survival, dignity, love. When a woman fled, the machinery of the state ground into motion to retrieve her with terrifying efficiency. Professional slave catchers, known as fugitivari, were hired. These were men who specialized in tracking human quarry, skilled in reading signs, bribing informants, and intimidating witnesses. They posted notices in the forum. Plastered on walls and columns detailed descriptions of the runaway's appearance, age, accent, and distinguishing marks. They offered rewards that could equal a year's wages for a common laborer, turning every citizen into a potential informant. The fugitive woman was hunted like an animal. She had nowhere to go. The roads were watched by soldiers. The ports were guarded by customs officials. To survive, she had to navigate a hostile world where her very existence was illegal, relying on the kindness of strangers in a society that punished charity to runaways with heavy fines. And when she was inevitably caught, because the system was designed to ensure she would be, because the net was too tight and the world too small, the first act of the master was to reclaim ownership in the most visceral way possible. This brings us to the first and most enduring punishment, branding. The Romans did not believe in rehabilitation for runaways. They believed in stigmatization. The captured woman would be dragged back to the household or a prison. She would be restrained, often by strong men or mechanical fetters that locked her limbs in place. A brazier would be lit, the coals fanned until they glowed an angry, pulsing orange. An iron stamp, crafted by a blacksmith specifically for this purpose, would be placed into the heart of the fire, absorbing the heat until it turned white. The atmosphere in the room would be heavy with anticipation and dread. The crackle of the fire, the only sound before the scream. The stamp typically bore 3 simple letters: F, V, G, fugitiva. Sometimes, for those masters who wished to be more verbose in their cruelty, it would read, Ten me ne fugia, hold me, lest I flee. The iron would be removed from the fire, radiating waves of heat that distorted the air. It would be pressed against the woman's forehead, the most visible part of her body, the seat of her identity. The skin would sizzle and blacken instantly. The pain would be blinding, a white-hot shock that seared the nerves and sent the body into spasms of agony. The smell of burning flesh would fill the room, a scent that would haunt the witnesses forever. But the physical pain, intense as it was only the beginning of the torture. The true punishment was the scar that remained long after the burn had healed. In Roman culture, the face was the seat of honor and recognition. To disfigure the face was to destroy the person's social existence. A branded woman could never hide again. She could never blend into a crowd at the market. She could never pass as free, even if she managed to escape a second time. The scar screamed her status to the world. It announced to everyone she met, I am a thief of myself. I am untrustworthy. I am broken property. It was a permanent mask of shame that she was forced to wear until the day she died. Roman jurists even debated the legality of covering these brands with hair or makeup, arguing that to hide the mark was a form of fraud against potential buyers. She was marked cattle, and the brand on her forehead was the receipt of her rebellion, a constant reminder of the day she tried to be free and failed. The psychological weight of seeing that mark in the mirror every day, of seeing the eyes of others recoil or fill with contempt, was a torture that never ended. But the master's wrath often required a more immediate, public display than a healing burn. Branding was permanent, but it was intimate. To send a message to the other slaves in the household, to the neighbors, and to the city at large. The master might choose a punishment of spectacle, chaining at the gate. The Roman domus was a fortress of privacy for the family, but its entrance, the vestibulum, was a public stage. It was the threshold between the family and the street, the point of contact with the outside world. Here, the master would chain the recaptured woman, transforming her into a living monument to his power. The punishment was known as ad ianuum at the door. It was a spatial assertion of control she had tried to leave through this door, and now she would be bound to it. She would be shackled to the doorpost or a heavy iron ring set deep into the stone wall. The chains were often made of heavy, rusted iron, weighing down her neck and limbs, forcing her into a crouching or kneeling position that made rest impossible. She became a living gargoyle, a piece of architectural ornamentation designed to warn visitors before they even entered. "Look," the chained woman said, without speaking. "This is what happens to those who defy the master of this house. His power is absolute." She would be left there for days, sometimes weeks, exposed to the baking heat of the Italian summer, where the stone burned the skin, or the damp chill of winter, where the cold seeped into the bones. The elements became a secondary torturer, relentless and indifferent. She was denied all dignity. Passers-by citizens in their togas, freedmen conducting business, other slaves running errands would see her. They might spit on her, mock her, throw refuse at her, or simply look at her with cold indifference. She was often denied food or water for long stretches, reducing her to a state of begging desperation. Forced to lap water from the ground like a dog or plead with strangers for a crust of bread. The Roman playwright Plautus, in his comedies, makes jokes about slaves chained at the gate, treating their suffering as a punchline for the audience's amusement. This casual cruelty reveals a terrifying truth about the Roman mindset. The suffering of the enslaved was not a tragedy to be mourned, it was a fact of life, as mundane as the rain. A necessary mechanism to keep the world turning. For a woman, this punishment had a specific gendered dimension that added a layer of psychological violation. Roman society placed a high value on female modesty, on the idea of the woman being protected within the home, shielded from the public gaze, to be chained outside, exposed to the eyes of every stranger, was a violation of every social norm regarding femininity. It stripped her of her gender and reduced her to a beast on a leash. It was a calculated humiliation designed to break her spirit so completely that the thought of running would never enter her mind again. She was no longer a woman. She was a warning sign made of flesh and blood. The shame of exposure was often more effective than the physical pain of the chains. It was a public unraveling of the self. However, for some women, those deemed incorrigible, those who fought back against their captors, or those whose escape had deeply embarrassed, a powerful master domestic punishment was not enough. The state offered a final solution, a way to turn a troublesome piece of property into a public entertainment that reinforced the social order. This was the arena. We often think of the Colosseum as the domain of the gladiator, the armed professional fighting for glory and gold. But there was another category of performance, far grimmer and far more common, known as the meridiani, the midday executions. This was damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. This was a death sentence reserved for the worst criminals, arsonists, traitors, and runaway slaves who could not be broken. An enslaved woman condemned to the arena was not given a sword. She was not given armor. She was given a role in a play scripted by executioners. She might be dressed in a flimsy tunic to represent a mythological figure, perhaps Dirce tied to the bull or Pasiphae, or she might be stripped naked, her vulnerability offered up for the titillation of the crowd. She would be led out onto the burning sand, the roar of 50,000 people washing over her like a physical wave, a wall of noise demanding blood. The sheer scale of the spectacle was designed to make her feel small, insignificant, and utterly alone. She would be chained to a stake in the center of the arena, or forced to run a gauntlet between armed men. Then, the trapdoors in the floor would open. Lions, bears, leopards, boars, animals starved for days to provoke their aggression would be released from the darkness below. The Roman crowd watched this not with horror, but with fascination and approval. It was justice in action. It was the restoration of order over chaos. The slave who had tried to rise above her station was being consumed by nature itself. Her screams were drowned out by the cheers of the mob eating their lunch. It was the ultimate erasure her body destroyed. Her death commodified as entertainment. Her existence ended as a halftime show between the beast hunts and the gladiatorial duels. The sand would soak up her blood, and the games would continue. If the arena was the theater of death, the mines were the factory of death. For women who were strong, or for whom the master desired a lingering, profitable suffering. There was damnatio in metallum, condemnation to the mines. The Roman economy ran on metal gold for coins, iron for weapons, lead for pipes, copper for bronze. These metals came from mines in Spain, Dacia, and the Balkans. These places were hell on earth, industrial nightmares hidden away from the civilized centers. To the Romans, the mines were the underworld made manifest. To be sent to the mines was a death sentence, but a slow one. It was slavery stripped of all domestic veneer, of any pretense of paternalism. There were no roofs, no beds, no rest. The women sent there were stripped of their names and given numbers. Their heads were shaved to prevent lice and mark them as prisoners. They were branded, not just on the forehead, but often on the cheeks and arms, marking them as penal laborers owned by the state. They worked alongside the men, hauling baskets of heavy ore up narrow, suffocating shafts, climbing rickety ladders hundreds of feet underground. The air was thick with toxic dust that coated the lungs and slowly suffocated the workers, turning their breath into a rattle. Abuse was rampant and unchecked. The overseers in the mines were often criminals themselves, men given authority over the damned. Sexual violence was a daily reality, a tool of control used to terrorize the women into working harder or submitting to authority. Pregnancy in the mines was a catastrophe. Infants born in the dark tunnels usually died within days from exposure. Malnutrition or heavy metal poisoning. There was no escape from the mines. The locations were remote, surrounded by wilderness. The guards were brutal. The laborers were chained together in gangs. A woman sent to the mines simply vanished from the world. She became a ghost while she was still breathing. Her life consumed day by day to produce the silver denarii that lined the purses of the Roman elite. Her body would eventually be discarded in a mass grave, unmourned and unremembered. But before the branding, before the arena, before the mines, there was the whip, the flagrum. This was the universal language of Roman authority, the tool that enforced the will of the master in every household across the empire. It was a whip with multiple leather thongs, often knotted or weighted with small pieces of metal or sheep bone. It was designed not just to cause pain, but to tear flesh, to flay the skin from the muscle. Whipping was the most common punishment for a recaptured fugitive. It required no special equipment, no travel, no bureaucracy. It could be done in the courtyard of the house, immediately upon capture. For a woman, the whip was an instrument of total domination. She would be stripped, her back exposed, and tied to a post or suspended from a beam by her wrists so her feet barely touched the ground. The master, or a designated overseer known as a lorarius, would deliver the lashes. The metal weights would bite into the skin, flaying the back, leaving deep, ragged wounds that would bleed profusely and scar forever. The number of lashes was arbitrary. It depended entirely on the anger of the master. There were no laws limiting the violence a master could inflict on his property. He could whip her until she fainted, until her bones were exposed, until she died of shock. The sound of the whip cracking against skin was a familiar noise in the Roman household, a soundtrack of submission. This punishment was often performed in front of the other slaves. It was a didactic act, a lesson written in blood. See, the sound of the whip seemed to say, "This is the price of defiance. This is the cost of thinking you own yourself." The screams of the woman were meant to terrorize the household into submission. After the beating, she would be left to heal or fester without medical care. Salt and vinegar might be rubbed into the wounds, not to disinfect, but to increase the agony. A final reminder of her transgression. The scars on her back would serve as a private brand, a hidden map of her history that she would carry beneath her tunic for the rest of her life. A secret shame known only to her and her tormentors. Even if she survived, the trauma of the beating would remain etched in her psyche, a constant reminder of her vulnerability. The punishments Rome imposed on fugitive enslaved women: branding, public chaining, the arena, the scourge, and the mines reveal a terrifying truth about the empire we often idolize. It was a society willing to sacrifice human dignity on an industrial scale to protect its social order. The Roman elite lived in constant fear of their slaves. They knew they were outnumbered. They knew that their luxury, their art, their philosophy, was built on a foundation of stolen lives. This fear bred a cruelty that knew no bounds, a paranoia that demanded absolute submission. Every scar on a slave's body was a testament to the master's fear of losing control. These acts were not just punishments, they were acts of terrorism. They were designed to broadcast fear, to break the will of the enslaved population, to turn the human body into a billboard for the power of the state. When we look at the marble statues of Roman matrons, at the peaceful ruins of the Forum, at the majesty of the Pantheon, we must also see the invisible ghosts standing behind them, the women with FVG burned into their foreheads, the women torn apart by lions in the midday sun, the women coughing their lungs out in the dark of the mines. We must hear the silence of the millions whose voices were stolen by the whip and the chain. History is no relic. It is a mirror. The systems of control that Rome perfected, the surveillance, the dehumanization, the use of public spectacle to enforce obedience, echo through the ages. They remind us that the architecture of domination always rests on visible pain. As the philosopher Seneca, one of the few Roman voices to question this brutality, cautioned in a letter to his friend Lucilius Servi Sunt, Immo homines. They are slaves, no. They are human beings. But for the fugitive women of Rome, that humanity was the very thing the empire sought to destroy. And in their suffering, we see the true cost of the glory of Rome, a cost paid in flesh, blood, and the stolen freedom of millions. The next time you see the grandeur of Rome, remember the women who ran, and remember what happened when they were caught.